Natalie Cochran has achieved what many can only dream of. Natalie has a loving husband and 2 children, a beautiful home, and, above all, a prosperity she has worked hard for and is truly proud of. Natalie Cochran knows that she has not only made smart decisions, but also had a great deal of luck. That's what got her where she is at the end of the 2010s. And Natalie would do anything to maintain her status. Anything. Natalie and Michael Cochran have been married since their early 20s. They have done everything as expected of them. They have a marriage, a house in West Virginia, 2 children, and solid jobs. However, as the children grow older and Michael and Natalie reach their late 30s, they feel the desire for more, for a new beginning. Therefore, the Cochrans decide to take the next big step together. In 2017, Natalie and her husband Michael registered a joint company, Tactical Solutions Group, or TSG for short. They stated that they would focus on bidding for contracts to sell weapons and other goods to the US government. You may be wondering how anyone without any special knowledge could come up with such an idea. The answer is quite simple. In 2016, the comedy film War Dogs was released, which Natalie really liked. In the film, Miles Teller and Jonah Hill play 2 men who start just such a business. They want to sell weapons to the US military, even though they have no experience in the arms industry. And Natalie Cochran thinks she can do the same. She deliberately ignores the fact that, spoiler alert, both characters end up in jail during the course of the film. Natalie quits her job as a pharmacist and now owns the majority stake in the new family business. Michael supports his wife. As a company, they naturally need liquid assets. Natalie doesn't think twice about approaching her friends and family first. They could invest in TSG. As soon as profits start rolling in, everyone would get a fair share. And that would happen very quickly. After all, the Cochrans want to work closely with the US government. Fast sales are virtually guaranteed. This seems to make sense to Natalie's circle. And indeed, some of her relatives decide to invest in TSG. Some even invest 6-figure sums. The gamble seems to be paying off. TSG is growing rapidly. Soon the family is taking expensive vacations in Hawaii and Europe. The Cochrans not only buy several cars, but also 3 homes. Things couldn't be going better. And while the Cochrans revel in luxury, their investors are naturally rubbing their hands with glee. But somehow, the money never reaches them. When a few of them inquire, Natalie puts them off. Natalie also does volunteer work. She is the treasurer of a middle school baseball team. So it is Natalie's job to keep track of income and expenses and manage them. She also manages the team's account. And at some point, other people on the baseball team notice that money is missing. Just recently, the team raised a total of $15,000 in donations. A great success. But this sum has almost completely disappeared from the team's account managed by Natalie. The others are so suspicious of Natalie that they don't talk to her, but hire a private investigator instead. And he discovers something truly astonishing. There are numerous withdrawals totaling several tens of thousands of dollars. However, these withdrawals are not from sporting goods stores, sports facility operators, or anything else you would expect to find on a baseball club's bank statements. Instead, they are payments to stores and restaurants such as TJ Maxx and the American Italian chain Olive Garden. So Natalie is embezzling money. A few of the friends who gave Natalie money for her business are also in the baseball club. And with the private investigators' findings, they put 2 and 2 together. TSG doesn't even exist. The company is a fake, and this discovery is only the beginning. On February 6th, 2019, Natalie and Michael have an appointment. They want to fly to Virginia and meet with someone from Bank of America, an asset manager who will manage the Cochrans' new wealth. But the two can't leave as planned. They've both been hit hard. Natalie writes to friends that they have a bad case of the flu. She sends a photo of Michael, who appears to be lying unconscious on the kitchen floor. Their friends are really shocked. This doesn't look like a bad case of the flu, which is essentially harmless. So they set off for the Cochrans' house in the afternoon. Not only because Michael has apparently lost consciousness, but also because of Natalie. She had told them just a few months ago that she had been diagnosed with cancer. And of course, extreme caution is required with any infection. When they arrive at the Cochrans' house, however, the friends can only speak to Natalie. She says that Michael doesn't want to see a doctor and just needs to rest. The friends leave, and it is not until hours later that Michael is taken to the emergency room. There, the doctors immediately realize that this could be serious, but it is definitely not the flu. Examinations reveal that Michael has cerebral edema, meaning that his brain is severely swollen. In addition, his blood sugar level is extremely low. Over the next few days, the doctors try everything to stabilize Michael's condition. He is treated in the hospital for 5 days but does not regain consciousness. He dies on February 11th. Now newly widowed, Natalie not only has to cope with the grief of losing her husband, but also has to keep her business going. On top of that, the people from the baseball club are breathing down her neck, wanting to know where their money has gone. And the TSG investors haven't seen any money from her in a long time either. The entrepreneur makes excuses, saying that cancer treatments, running costs, and Michael's death are all making things difficult. But Natalie knows that something has to change. She needs to hand over some responsibility to give herself a little more breathing space. So in the spring of 2019, she decides to sell almost half of TSG. She has found a buyer, and the deal is as good as done. Natalie is to receive $4 million for her shares in the company in one lump sum. But it never comes to that, because on June 25th, 2019, Natalie Cochran's house is raided by the police. Natalie is arrested that day. The charge, fraud in 26 cases. Her friends were right in their suspicions. TSG does not actually exist. With the Tactical Solution Group, Natalie had created a classic Ponzi scheme. This pattern was named after a well-known fraudster. In principle, a Ponzi scheme works by attracting investors with promises of astronomically high returns. In this case, the investors are friends and family of the Cochrans. When such returns are paid out, they do not come from profits, but from the deposits of new investors. This system naturally requires a constant influx of new money and investors. Because the alleged contracts with the US government, with which Natalie claims to have earned her money, do not exist. This also explains where the money from the baseball clubs disappeared to, for example. And Natalie's alleged cancer diagnosis does not seem to exist either. The Cochrans' treating physicians have no record of such a diagnosis. In court, Natalie Cochran pleads guilty. She is sentenced to 11 years in prison. She also has to pay back a total of $2.5 million to the victims. Actually, the story could end here. It would have ended if it hadn't been for the search of Natalie Cochran's house and her failure to remove evidence of a murder from her home. When the police search the Cochrans' house in June 2019, they find a vial of insulin in the refrigerator. This strikes the investigators as odd, as neither Natalie nor her late husband Michael had any medical need for it. However, Michael was admitted to the hospital with dangerously low blood sugar levels before his death. His sudden death was initially ruled a natural death due to cerebral edema. But since Natalie is already serving time for dozens of fraud cases, the police take the time to take a closer look at her husband's untimely death. Michael's body is released by a judge for exhumation, and in November 2021, Natalie is no longer just a convicted fraudster, but a suspected murderer. The prosecution accuses Natalie of injecting her husband Michael with a lethal dose of insulin. It is suspected that she killed Michael because she was afraid of meeting with Bank of America, which was scheduled for the day Michael was admitted to the hospital. Her Ponzi scheme might have been exposed, and that would have been disastrous not only for herself and her supposed business, but also for her marriage. The prosecution suspects that Michael knew nothing about his wife's activities. She owned most of the shares in the company, and Michael is said to have only helped her out from time to time. The prosecution believes that Michael himself became suspicious of his wife. By murdering him, Natalie wanted to prevent her huge scam from being exposed. Natalie's lawyers reject these allegations. Natalie has admitted to the Ponzi scheme and continues to deny that she was involved, but she claims that Michael was also involved and knew about the fraud. After all, he was the one who made numerous expensive purchases and booked costly trips. Natalie also categorically denies having harmed her husband. She says that Michael kept the insulin in the refrigerator himself because he was interested in bodybuilding. This is not uncommon in the sport, although it is extremely dangerous. This is because insulin supports muscle growth and can enhance the effects of other anabolic steroids. However, if insulin is taken incorrectly or in excessive doses, it can also lead to death. And according to Natalie and her lawyers, this is exactly what happened to Michael. However, there are two witnesses who have made serious allegations against Natalie. Her friend Stephanie received a message from Natalie on February 4th. Stephanie works as a doctor's assistant, and Natalie asked her about injectable steroids. Her friend Jennifer testified that Natalie contacted her on February 6th, 2019. Natalie told her that she and Michael were sick. Natalie knew that Jennifer had been prescribed insulin. That's why she asked Jennifer if she could have some. She had read that insulin could help with her alleged cancer. Jennifer agreed, and her husband brought a vial of insulin to the Cochrans' house. A few hours later, Michael was in the hospital with brain edema and low blood sugar. However, the defense claims that Michael had already been hospitalized once before in November 2018 after a mysterious episode. It could therefore be that Michael really did die of natural causes. But Natalie's friend Stephanie, who is a medical assistant, disagrees. She was in close contact with the Cochran family in November to advise Michael. During the episode in November, he was conscious the whole time and said himself that he wanted to go to the hospital for treatment. He had been feeling unwell for some time, and Stephanie suspected at the time that he might be suffering from black mold exposure. Before February 6, 2019, however, Michael had been in excellent health. There had been no further warning signs after the November episode. In addition, Michael spoke with one of his employees and Natalie in November after his hospital stay. He remembers Michael complaining of dizziness in December and saying he felt like he had been poisoned. Natalie and Michael's children, however, exonerate their mother. They say their father constantly took dietary supplements and steroids and was seriously ill in November. According to Nicole and her brother, Michael took 30 to 40 dietary supplements every day. He loved to work out and participate in bodybuilding competitions. Although Michael was physically fit, he had been complaining of dizziness and headaches since October 2018 and had been very forgetful. Nicole, who was 13 at the time, suspected that her father might have a brain tumor. The symptoms had persisted until the day of Michael's collapse. Natalie Cochran's sister also testified that Michael had repeatedly taken pills and steroids. She advised him not to, but Michael just laughed at her. She also said she saw Michael inject himself with something, but she didn't know if it was insulin. One thing that is significant when considering Natalie's guilt is, of course, the cause of Michael's death. The coroner responsible for the case stated in court that he had performed an autopsy on Michael 7 months after his death. He said that at the time of the autopsy, slight decomposition had set in, making it impossible to determine whether insulin had been used and where the injection sites might be. Accordingly, the cause and manner of death were deemed undetermined. So, even though Michael's cause of death can no longer be officially determined, Natalie is charged with Michael's murder. One reason for this is the records of Michael's hospital stay. When he was admitted on February 6, 2019, his glucose levels were at 21, whereas a normal level would be between 80 and 100. This could well have been caused by a massive dose of insulin. Tests at the hospital could have provided information about this. However, these tests were not carried out. Other causes of low glucose levels could be severe malnutrition or drug abuse. Neither of these seem to play a role in Michael's case. Another doctor, however, testified that Michael's urine sample contained benzodiazepine, and he did not have a prescription for this. Benzodiazepines can be abused and, if overdosed, can lead to health problems and even sudden death due to cardiac arrhythmia. According to the defense, Michael's medical records also contain further diagnoses. These include an enlarged heart and encephalopathy. The latter is a collective term for diseases or damage to brain functions that affect the entire organ. Various forms of this can certainly lead to cerebral edema. However, in severe cases, cerebral edema could also have been caused by low blood sugar levels. So, there are arguments on both sides here. Natalie's defense claims that the insulin vial in her refrigerator had never been opened. An FBI forensic scientist, however, found that the cap of the insulin vial had been pierced. It is possible that Natalie, as a trained pharmacist, knew how to open the vial and extract a discrete but lethal amount of insulin. Another incriminating factor is that Natalie has given 3 different versions of the events of February 6th. In the first interview, Natalie said that she and Michael were at home together when Michael went into the kitchen at around 10 a.m. She heard a loud bang and went to investigate. Michael was lying on the kitchen floor and there was a bottle of clomiphene citrate, a testosterone-boosting drug, on the counter. In the second interview, a month later, Natalie said that she and Michael had been sitting together in the living room for about an hour when he went into the kitchen, fell down, hit his head on the countertop, and landed on the floor. In this conversation, she said that she had found the clomiphene citrate in the cupboard. And a day later, during the third interrogation, Natalie said that they had spent the morning apart. Michael had come back home, slept on the couch for an hour, and then gone into the kitchen, where he collapsed. In this conversation, Natalie also said that Michael had injected himself with insulin in the back. So there are 3 contradictory versions of the day Michael died. In her closing statement, the prosecutor concluded that Natalie had the motive, the means, and the opportunity to murder Michael. Since Michael knew nothing about the Ponzi scheme, Natalie had only 2 options: come clean or eliminate him. The only reasonable explanation for a healthy man with no history of diabetes suffering from life-threatening hypoglycemia is an overdose of insulin. She also warns against believing the claim that Michael abused steroids, as no such substances were found in the Cochran home. The whole case is therefore based on circumstantial evidence. If you like, pause the video at this point and write your opinion in the comments. Think back briefly to what you have just heard. Do you think there are enough arguments to convict Natalie of murdering her husband? Or does something about the circumstantial evidence strike you as odd? In June 2025, the verdict against Natalie Cochran will be handed down, and the jury is unanimous. Natalie is now not only a convicted fraudster, but also a murderer. She is found guilty of the murder of her own husband, Michael Cochran, and sentenced to life imprisonment. And that brings us to the end of today's video. What starts with $1 million fraud ends with a murder. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on the case. While researching, I already knew that Natalie was ultimately found guilty. Nevertheless, Some of the arguments presented during the trial still surprised me and made me wonder, did you feel the same way? Or was it crystal clear to you that Natalie murdered her husband? Feel free to let me know in the comments. By the way, this also supports the channel because any interaction increases the likelihood that the video will be recommended to people who haven't subscribed to Insolito yet. Other than that, there's not much more to say. I wish you a good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on when you're watching the video, and hope to see you again in the next video. Until then, bye everyone.